devotion to sports fandom has really been growing rather significantly. More and more individuals are really transferring their loyalties and their devotion from the sanctuary to the stadium.
I'm Mitch.
And I'm Missy.
We're co-workers.
He's the boss, and we're married.
And she's the boss. Together, we host Good Faith Weekly, a podcast on faith and culture.
What could possibly go wrong?
Tune in and find out. Missy. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up, and I've got a little surprise at the beginning. And then later on, we're going to sit down with Dr. Randall Balmer, who is a professor at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. He's got a brand new book out entitled Passion Plays, How Religion Shapes Sports in North America. It is a wonderful conversation that we have with him, so you want to stay tuned. And then after the interview, Missy and I are going to talk about the interview and have a little wisdom, hopefully, to share with you. So stay tuned. It's going to be a good pod. Missy, it is so good to see you. How are things in your life?
Well, just living the dream, man.
Just living the dream.
It is, what time? Oh, I don't know. It's dark outside in the night, and I'm still in my pajamas from this morning. So, you know.
Well, I'm just glad we don't have a dress code here at Good Faith Media.
Well, if my boss would give me time to shower during the day, it'd be better.
You got work to do.
That's right. That's right.
Well, you know, last week we got a lot of great feedback from the audience about the quiz that you gave me concerning the Supreme Court.
We did.
Have you ever heard of the saying that turnabout is fair play?
No.
Or in this instance, a dish served is served.
What is that saying there, Mitch?
I just pulled a President Bush there. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on.
Please clap, as his brother said. Please clap.
Please clap. Please clap. No, I got a little quiz for you. We had Randall Balmer on this week. Had a great conversation with him about his new book, Passion Plays, about sports and faith in North America. So I prepared a little quiz for you to begin this episode. It is entitled...
Wait. How many lifelines do I have?
Oh, you're going to make phone calls.
I've got some phone a friends, right?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, this quiz is entitled Missy's Quiz Over Sports Balls. Because...
Do you really want to go there with me on the public podcast?
Because that's what you say. I'm not a fan of sports balls. So,
well.
Okay, so here's question number one. What sport is described as the beautiful game?
I think it's hockey.
Seriously?
Soccer.
Oh
No,
my
soccer.
gosh.
Soccer.
Your son played this for years.
Concept, soccer.
Yeah, same concept. Different pitches.
Okay.
Question number two. How many regulation strokes are there in swimming?
What?
How many regulation strokes are there in swimming?
Oh, you mean like butterfly versus backstroke versus, I don't know, 4?
You got it. Ding, 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 ding.
Awesome.
Bonus points for naming them.
That's right. I named 2 or 3. What?
Yep.
Butterfly, backstroke, regular stroke. I don't know.
Oh, the old 1,000-meter regular stroke. Would you win that gold medal in? That would be called freestyle.
Freestyle. Okay.
And the breaststroke. So those are the 4.
How could I forget breaststroke? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to leave that one alone. Number 3. How long is the total distance in a marathon?
Oh, I know. You ran this.
I did.
Like, 22 miles. Oh,
you got the 2 right. 26.2 miles or 42.16 kilometers.
Okay, sorry. I should have known that. I ordered you the bumper sticker.
Yeah, you did. Number 4. How many NBA championships did Michael Jordan win with the Chicago Bulls?
All I know about Michael Jordan is he was cut from his high school freshman team. That is my only fun fact about Michael Jordan. So
That sounds like a pastoral illustration.
Yes, of course.
It's the number 6. He won 6 championships with the Chicago Bulls. All right, this one should be easy. How many players are there on a baseball team?
Seriously?
Yeah.
How many players or how many people on the field?
On the field.
Okay, hang on, audience. I gotta okay, wait. The offense or the defense?
Defense.
Defense. So catcher, first base, second base, third base, shortstop. I almost said fourth base. And 3 outfielders.
The Hall of Famer.
I think there's 9. 8 or 9.
9. So I'll give you half credit. That was pretty good.
Okay.
All right. Number 6. Which is the only American football team to go a whole season undefeated, including the Super Bowl?
I'm going to have to say Dallas Cowboys just because. Let's all take a moment.
Oh,
okay.
Hey, your Texas is showing.
Right. The big hair.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's actually bedhead from last night. So.
The 1972 Miami Dolphins went undefeated that entire season, winning the Super Bowl. Number 7, which NFL team appeared in 4 consecutive Super Bowls from 1991 to 1994 and lost them all, including a few to your Dallas Cowboys?
Oh, crap. I do know this answer. Is it the Buffalo Bills?
Yeah, ding, ding, ding,
gosh,
ding. You got
they
it.
played my Cowboys.
Yeah,
Okay.
well played, well
Hey.
played. All right, switching sports, back to baseball. What is the curse of the Bambino?
That he never won a World Series Super Bowl?
First of all, who is the Bambino?
Is it Babe Ruth?
Yes.
Okay, I know that because of Sandlot.
Okay, so what is the curse of the Bambino?
That he didn't win?
No.
No? Okay, then I don't know.
It is a
That
superstition.
a dog stole his baseball.
No, it is a superstition that was derived in Major League Baseball for the 86-year championship drought of the Boston Red Sox between 1918 and 2004. The reason? They traded Babe Ruth from Boston to New York.
Well, I mean, that checks out.
That does check out.
When you trade Babe Ruth,
That they finally won a World Series and broke the curse. So.
And they won 2 while
Yeah.
our kid was in college, living right on the Boston Commons. Looked out of his dorm room and got to see the parade and all that. It was so unfair.
Yeah, it was crazy. He got to see a lot of cool things. Number 9. This one's a hard one. How far is the distance between home plate and the pitching rubber in baseball? And you get an extra credit point if you tell me why.
How long between third base and home?
No, home plate and the pitching rubber.
Home. You gotta quit with that.
The home plate and the pitching rubber.
Mound. Okay.
See, I had mound, but that is incorrect. The more accurate term is pitching
Is
rubber.
our audience ready for our story about our neighbor?
I don't know.
rubbers?
That's a good one. Let's maybe save that for the end of the show. Okay. So what's the distance?
Audience, you have to stick around. If you stick around, you get a bonus story about rubbers. Okay. So how far is it from the pitching mound to home plate? I have no idea.
It is 60.6 inches. And the reason it is 60.6 inches?
No, it's not inches.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not inches. 60 inches is like how tall I am. Ooh,
Yes.
Somebody has a... From home plate to the pitching mound?
Oh, no. 60.6 feet. Sorry.
I was gonna
60 feet, 6 inches is
Okay,
what it is.
okay. So tell me why.
Sorry about that. The reason is when Abner Doubleday came up with the rules of baseball, he hand wrote the rules and gave them to his secretary. She had a hard time reading his handwriting
Relatable.
because he put down 60.0 and she mistook his 0.0 for a 6. And so it's forever been 60 feet, 6 inches.
That's funny. We had a similar situation a couple weeks ago in New York when you thought you tipped the waiter $600 or whatever.
It's like, oh, hang on.
Folks, it pays to write neatly.
Neatly. That's exactly right. All right. And here is the last question before we pitch it to the interview. Who's your favorite second baseman to ever play the game of baseball?
It must be you.
Ah,
Were you a second baseman?
Well, our media producer, Cliff Vaughn, gave that question to me, and I told him she's not going to know.
I mean, it was a good stab in the dark, right?
That was.
Well, because your jersey is retired at your high school. Should we tell the audience that?
No, we don't need to talk about
We
that.
have a framed jersey. You're forever memorialized at, what was your high school? Union?
Tulsa Union, yes.
Tulsa Union High School.
Yeah, well, that was fun.
That was
I thought
fun.
you did a pretty good job.
Okay, but now I've got tired head. You got to give me a break. So,
All right. Well, let's go talk to Dr. Balmer, and then we'll be back right after the interview.
sounds great.
All right. Stay tuned.
Hey, listeners, check us out online at goodfaithmedia.org and follow us on social at gfmedia.org. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. I'm new here and could really use the feedback, but only if it's glowing. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very, very special guest all the way from Hanover, New Hampshire. A prize-winning historian and Emmy Award nominee, Dr. Randall Balmer holds the John Phillips Chair in Religion at Dartmouth College, the oldest endowed professorship at Dartmouth. He earned a Ph.D. from Princeton University in 1985 and taught as professor of American Religious History at Columbia University for 27 years before coming to Dartmouth in 2012. He has been a visiting professor at Princeton, Yale, Northwestern, and Emory universities, and in the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. He was also a visiting professor at Yale Divinity School from 2004 to 2008. Dr. Balmer has been published widely in both scholarly journals and in popular press. He is regularly asked to comment on religion in American life, and he has appeared frequently on network television, NPR, and both The Colbert Report and The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. Dr. Balmer has published more than a dozen books. His latest is entitled Passion Plays, How Religion Shaped Sports in North America, and it is in bookstores now. So, Dr. Balmer, thank you for being with us, and welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Congratulations on the book. We've worked through it the last couple of weeks. It's outstanding. It's a little different from your other materials that you've written, but we really, really thoroughly enjoyed it because, coming from a sports background myself, I just loved it. So, Dr. Balmer, why did you decide to write about the relationship between faith and sports?
Well, the deep background for the book really was my graduate school years at Princeton in the early 1980s. And my mentor in the history department, John Murrin, was a huge sports fan. And he would very often talk about the symbolic world surrounding all of the team sports in North America. He didn't talk about hockey because he wasn't a hockey fan, but otherwise the other three major sports. And I just was fascinated by what he had to say about that, talking about baseball as an immigrant game and so forth. And so I've been kind of thinking about his ideas for the last 40 years and decided to try to write something about this because John unfortunately never did, although I would have gladly deferred to him in writing a book about sports in North America. Tragically, he died of COVID a couple of years ago, so he didn't get a chance to see this book. But the more immediate catalyst was when I was teaching in New York City in the early 1990s. I was introduced to sports radio. And I was just fascinated by it. The challenge that hosts would face sustaining a conversation and a debate over hours and hours and hours over whether or not the Mets manager should have lifted the starting pitcher with 2 outs in the bottom of the 6th inning and things like that. And I just got entranced by that and frankly addicted to it. And so this book is really the consequence of reflecting on sports in North America for a very long time.
Well, Dr. Balmer, I have been made to promise a mutual friend of ours that I would open my first question with long time, first time. So, long time, first time. I'll ask. In the book, you talk about the rise of sports in association with faith in the early 20th century. You refer to the rise as muscular Christianity. Can you expand on that a little bit for our listeners and talk about how it still continues to affect our culture today?
First, we should probably explain that first time, long time is a kind of ritual incantation, at least in the early years of sports radio. And it stood for first time caller, long time listener. And so that would often be the sort of introduction for somebody calling in for the first time before he offered his views on whatever the crucial issue at hand might have been at that particular moment. Muscular Christianity is a fascinating development in 19th century Christianity, really in the English-speaking world. It began in Britain, actually, out of concern, first of all, that women were, in effect, taking charge of the churches in terms of their numbers and their participation, their volunteer labor, and so forth. And part of that was due to the Industrial Revolution. That is, men were no longer working from home, no longer farming in a subsistence way. And so they were working instead at in the factories or in sedentary office jobs. And what a lot of people were noticing, especially in Britain at the time, is that men were not getting enough exercise, not getting enough fresh air. And so a group of Protestant leaders, not any particular group, but just sort of a loose coalition of Protestant leaders, decided to promote the faith by promoting athleticism as well. And as I'm sure you know, this draws on very common New Testament metaphors, particularly in the writings of St. Paul, where Paul talks about putting on the full armor of God, running the race, finishing the course, contending for the prize, and that sort of language. And so muscular Christianity really adopted those two metaphors of militarism and athleticism. Probably the best example of that, certainly for militarism, would be the Salvation Army, which of course began in Britain, but also the Young Men's Christian Association, or the YMCA. But there are other organizational examples as well. For example, you've got the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. For Catholics, you have Knights of Columbus, but also the CYO, the Catholic Youth Organization, that organized boxing tournaments and basketball games for Catholic youth. And then even among Jews, the Young Men's Hebrew Association, which of course was an attempt to replicate the success of the YMCA. And in American society, the most recent, best known example of muscular Christianity would be the Promise Keepers movement of the 1990s. And it's important to remember that the Promise Keepers really was organized or devised by the football coach at the University of Colorado. And these gatherings of men took place inside sports stadiums. So, this is muscular Christianity. You can't get much better example of muscular Christianity than Promise Keepers.
Yeah. When we were reading or, when we were working through that portion of the book and the definition of muscular Christianity and the examples that you just gave, I'm a kid of the 80s and 90s, and I remember the Power Team. I don't know if you recall.
I've forgotten all about that.
Yeah. Right. I don't know if you remember the Power Team, but they would come to schools and churches and, rip phone books out and stuff like that. And, they were using the power of God to do all these things.
That's right. Yeah. This is not the crowd you want to invite for dinner, however.
No, I had totally forgotten about that. But yes, my youth group did go to a Power Team conference or two.
That's right. In the introduction, you write these words, and this really spoke to me again as a former athlete. You write, although I'm intrigued by the parallels between religion and sports, stadiums as sacred space, game day rituals and liturgy and so on, I want to argue that Americans have a deeper visceral connection with sports in terms of both its popularity and the devotion of its adherents. That deeper connection, Dr. Balmer, I mean, it really astounds me how connected we are as a society and individually to the idea and practice of sport. Could you talk a little bit more about that deeper connection that you're referring to?
Sure. I think, I'm not much of a numbers person in terms of statistics or polls or so forth, but the numbers I've consulted show that at least over the last several decades, devotion to sports fandom, to put it in kind of a term, has really been growing rather significantly. At the same time that, as you know, religious adherence has been dropping over the last several decades. And it seems to me there's a connection between the two. I think more and more individuals, particularly men, and we can talk about that in a moment, are really transferring their loyalties and their devotion from the sanctuary to the stadium. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I think kind of looking and reasons beyond the very important reasons that I think sports have real religious connections in their roots. And we can talk about that as well if you'd like. But part of it is that I think, is particularly among the demographic of white males, there's been a growing sense over the last several decades that the larger world is unfair, that somehow the forces in society are sort of arrayed against them. Now, I want to emphasize this is perception.
Right.
I don't think it's reality, but it's perception. And I think, to be honest, and not to become political here, but this is the sentiment that has really driven the Trump voters in many ways,
right,
feeling as though that other people have some sort of privileged status in society, whether by virtue of color or gender or disability or whatever it might be, that other segments of the society are being preferred in one way or another, and that they are being disadvantaged. Now, again, I'm going to emphasize a second time, this is perception on the part of this demographic. I don't think it's reality, but that's perception. And I think one of the reasons that sports is so attractive for this demographic in particular is that sports offers an alternate, orderly universe. And I think you see that in all sorts of ways. Right. First of all, the playing fields or the courts are defined overwhelmingly by right angles. And something is either fair or foul. It's either in bounds or it's out of bounds. You're either safe or you're out. And I think there is a clarity, a kind of moral clarity to the world of sports that this demographic of white males thinks is missing in the larger societies. That is also to say, another example would be the competition itself. I think sports offers probably the closest thing in our society to a perfect meritocracy. That is to say, at least at the higher levels, the collegiate and the professional levels, you're not going to play unless you are talented, unless you're gifted. Now, I want to acknowledge that all sorts of factors play into whether or not you have access to the playing field. Socioeconomic standing, race, color, gender, all those things play into it. I understand that. But again, I think sports offers the closest thing we have to the proverbial level playing field where people compete on an equal footing. And I think that's part of the attraction that white males have to the world of sports. And it may explain why they have moved their real devotion, their real passion, their real energy away from the world of religion into the world of organized sports.
Yeah, makes sense.
So in the book, you talk about the four primary or big four sports in America: football, baseball, hockey, and basketball, and go through the history of those and how they've each dealt with integration and other social issues. I am a sports adjacent fan in that I love the food, I love the fun of being part of it, but I'm not someone who could tell you who won the World Series of football, right? That's how that goes.
The World Series
in 1989 or whatever. But
I think you just made your point.
Yeah.
Exactly. I learned so much and was really found the book fascinating, enjoyed it very much. But what, as you were researching, as someone who maybe was already a sports fan. Like, what was the most surprising discovery that you made during your research?
Well, there are a lot of things. First of all, as you know, I kind of take on the mythology surrounding the origins of baseball, and that I think is fascinating in all sorts of ways. And I think it speaks to the power of myth. That is, we want to hold on to the so-called Cooperstown myth because the real origins of baseball are rather more prosaic than the Cooperstown myth. So I think that's one thing. But also for me, I think the whole challenge of racial integration as it played out in different sports was fascinating for me to watch. And particularly in football, there's some very, very sad stories about football players who tried to integrate both college and professional football. One example, for example, is Greg Page, who arguably desegregated the Southeast Conference, the SEC conference in football, college football. And he was a recruit for the University of Kentucky. He arrived on campus. One of the initial practices, his teammates piled on him. He was paralyzed, and he died tragically 38 days later. Another instance is Johnny Bright, who was a Heisman Trophy favorite going into the 1951 college football season, quarterback for the Drake University Bulldogs out of Des Moines, Iowa, African-American, an extraordinary athlete. He goes down and plays a game at Oklahoma State. At that time it was called Oklahoma A&M in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And it's very clear, there's all sorts of evidence that the Oklahoma team, particularly a defensive lineman, ganged up on him and broke his jaw, disqualified him from the game. And for that reason, he did not win the Heisman Trophy that year. So there are all sorts of stories that really were quite compelling, quite poignant about the challenge of integrating these various leagues. On the other hand, I think there are some remarkable stories that are rather more positive. Jackie Robinson, of course, broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball on April 15th, 1947. Far too late. It should have happened decades earlier. But nevertheless, that was a sort of harbinger for social change in the larger society. More than a year later, Harry Truman, by executive order, desegregated the U.S. Armed Forces. So here's an example where football, sports, provides a sort of vanguard for social change in the larger society. So those were some of the things that struck me as I was writing the book.
And speaking of social change, because this is, it's so germane for us today, but throughout history, there has been this relationship, and you pointed out just so well in the book, this relationship of sports paralleling what's going on in society, and at times athletes and organizations standing up and making a stance on a particular issue. We've seen it in the 70s in the Olympics with addressing race. We've seen it multiple times, more recently with Colin Kaepernick taking a knee during the national anthem, and with Black Lives Matter movement over the last couple of years, and even more recently, the women's national soccer team fighting for equal pay, and it's a really amazing parallel to me. So, what do you think? Do you think these athletes understand or are starting to understand the power that they wield in society and the influence they can have to incorporate social change?
I think they are, and Colin Kaepernick, of course, is a wonderful example of that. Although it's a sad case too, because he has not played since 2017. Right. Even though, if you look, and I'm not a huge football. Well, I am a football fan. I'm not, one of these passionate or diehard fans. But if you look through the rosters of the NFL and look at backup quarterbacks and compare them to Colin Kaepernick, he comes out pretty well, and he should be having a job. He should have a place to play in the NFL, it seems to me. But that's that's another matter in many ways. But yes, I think athletes are beginning to understand their place as a sort of engine for social change. People like LeBron James, certainly, as you mentioned, the women's soccer team, the women's basketball team, the WNBA team, the Atlanta Dream, last year, standing up for civil rights at a time in a way that really could have been very costly to them in many ways. One of the things that was striking to me in the course of writing the book, and in many ways this is an answer to the previous question as well, was the ways in which social change now, I think, comes from the world of sports, sadly, more than from the realm of religion, in terms of a sort of prophetic voice. We used to look to such people as Walter Rauschenbusch, for example, associated with the social gospel movement, Abraham Joshua Heschel within Judaism, Thomas Merton, Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King Jr., Reinhold Niebuhr. These used to be the voices of prophecy in our society, by which I mean calling us to social justice as a society. And those voices, I think, religious voices have been muted in recent years. I think there's all sorts of reasons we can talk about why that is the case. But more and more, I think we're looking to athletes as people who are speaking up for issues of social justice. Again, Colin Kaepernick is a good example. Some of these other examples we mentioned as well. And I think that says something rather sad, frankly, about the state of religion in our society today. But given the popularity of athletics as opposed to religion, maybe it's not all that surprising.
It's funny. We just had the same conversation before we began recording with you, Mitch and I did, about what you're talking about. The athletes are able to stand up and speak, and they've been given this platform, and I think it's very brave. Like, and you mentioned the case with Colin Kaepernick, what he ended up giving up. I just think it's a sad statement on our churches and on our clergy that we clearly are not talking about the right things, and so people are. And
what's even more disturbing about it, Missy and Dr. Balmer, is that a lot of times when these athletes speak up on a social issue such as Black Lives Matter or LGBTQ rights, a lot of times the church is one of the first ones to condemn them.
Yes, yeah,
and that's just such a sad commentary.
It really is, and one of the episodes I cite in the book is Laura Ingraham, this Fox News personality, who was talking about LeBron James and Kevin Durant, if I remember correctly, and the stand that they had taken on behalf of racial justice, and her dismissive comment was "Shut up and dribble."
Yeah.
And I think this happens all too frequently, frankly, as you pointed out, with religious leaders as well, dismissing athletes as not being qualified to speak about moral concerns. And you also have within the world of sports and sports fandom this odd situation where an overwhelmingly white audience is cheering for athletes of color. And yet, if those athletes try to step out of that category, that is figuratively as well as literally step off of the field, then all of a sudden, they are pilloried as being inappropriate, or they need to stay in their lane and that sort of thing. And I think that's really one of the great kind of cruel paradoxes about sports fandom today, is that if athletes try to speak on larger matters, they tend to be dismissed as being unqualified. The "shut up and dribble" comment, I think, is pretty telling.
Yeah. It was very cringy I listened to the book, and when you quoted those words, it just made me wince. It's just kind of gross.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we've got a couple more questions for you. I've got one that's actually off script, and then I'm going to pitch it to Missy for our final question that we ask every guest. But as we were talking about masculine Christianity and the influence that sports has, in your research on the book, did you find any studies on the kind of the militarization of sports recently, because it seems as though, especially professional sports, has really been pushing armed forces, even changing their uniforms at times to have camouflage. Do you see some problems with that, or you okay with it?
Well, I'm not a huge fan of militarism in society, although I certainly acknowledge the necessity
Sure.
for defense and so forth. I understand that, but yeah, there is kind of a cult of militarism in our society that I think is goes back a long way, and it's, I think, in many ways regionally specific, particularly the South. One of the reasons that football, which, let's understand, is a military game because it has to do with the conquest and the defense of territory. One of the reasons that football is so popular in the South, I think, is because military culture in many ways defines the South. Now, football is popular elsewhere, and I understand that, and I want to acknowledge that. And I think the military overtones to football, and particularly the violence that is associated with football, is a big part of its appeal. And I think that's unfortunate in many ways. But you think about football and the connections with militarism, even the names of some of the stadiums out in Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Coliseum. Now, professional football isn't played there any longer, but it was for a long time. And that, of course, invokes the ancient gladiatorial struggles of ancient Rome. War Memorial Stadium in Little Rock, Arkansas, or Buffalo, New York, Soldier Field in Chicago. You have memorial stadiums everywhere, right. And most of them have a reference to military combat or veterans in one way or another. And as you pointed out, the use of camouflage uniforms or caps or other sorts of accessories, and even the national anthem and the military jets screaming past after the national anthem for special games and things like that. It's all very much militarism. In college football, the halftime, the marching band is an echo of military bands.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Balmer, it has been a pleasure. It always is great to talk to you. I always learn something. The new book, Passion Plays: How Religion Shaped Sports in North America, is in bookstores now. So as soon as you hit pause on this podcast and episode, make sure you go buy Dr. Balmer's book. But Dr. Balmer, before we let you go, we've got one question that Missy asked all of our guests. So I'm going to hand it over to her.
Dr. Balmer, thank you so much for speaking with us today. I very much enjoyed the book. But as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." In light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Well, thanks, Missy, and Mitch as well for this interview. I appreciate the chance to have a conversation. It's always a pleasure. More to tell. I think if I had to offer a crumb of wisdom, that crumb of wisdom would be keep the faith. I think there's a lot of reasons to be discouraged today, especially for people of faith. If you look at what we've just been talking about, religious adherence in our society is certainly going down, and there's reasons to be discouraged. Other developments in the society don't look a whole lot more promising, but I think it's important to keep the faith. One of the things that is striking to me, I was asked a few years ago to do an essay on the theological virtue of hope. And it struck me that of the three theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, which of course are at the end of 1 Corinthians 13, the virtue of hope is the one we speak about probably less frequently than the others. We talk a lot about love, particularly in connection with weddings and that sort of thing, and we talk about faith a good bit. But hope is the one virtue, it seems to me, that is almost entirely volitional. That is, we choose to be hopeful. We can choose to be hopeful. And I think in an era when hope is in short supply, it's important to be hopeful. I often say that anyone who is a parent does not have the luxury of despair. So I think hope is essential. And that is one way that we keep the faith.
Keep the faith. I love it.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Balmer.
My pleasure.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. And wow, Missy, what a conversation we just had with Dr. Balmer.
We did. I always feel so, I don't know, non-professorial in the presence of these brilliant professors and authors. That
You're so articulate. I don't know why.
That's right. It was wonderful.
He was wonderful. You know, the book, you and I both read the book. You listened to it. I read through it. And when he starts talking about sports, especially the stadiums and the field as being sacred place, man, I could relate to that because, you know, yes, it is a kind of a horrible thing that we're seeing sports stadiums really kind of replace church. But man, I get that sacredness about a field. I mean, I can still in the spring I get the smell of cut grass and pine tar, and it takes me back to those days playing baseball. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just being there with your teammates and your fans and even, you know, the other team, there was just a lot of, he called it liturgy, and there just was. I mean, there was sayings and inside information and, you know, this just a beautiful experience. So I really appreciated that description of that sacred space.
So I pulled a couple of quotes from the introduction that I think kind of apply here because I feel like, like I said, I'm a sports fan in as much as I love the excitement of it. I love the food. I love the camaraderie. I love the getting together. You know, that, and I'll watch and I understand to some degree. Mm-hmm. But I found a couple of things that he said pretty poignant. And he says in the introduction, team sports in North America appeals disproportionately to men, especially white men who find in sports an alternative, orderly universe, very much in contrast to their perceptions of an unfair, chaotic world all around them. For them, sports supplies a kind of refuge, not unlike the one that their faith once provided. And in thinking of that, and I don't want to say it's either or. It's not.
Sure.
Like, I mean, sports ball is super fun. Love it. But I feel like as people, we are just prone to want to classify. We want to have a winner and a loser. Mm-hmm. We want to have these clearly defined lines. And we tried that for a long time in religion. Mm-hmm. You're in, you're out. You're following the rules or you're not. You're obeying the tenets or you're not. And I don't feel like that's what Jesus intended. Mm-hmm. And that's not what God intended. I mean, he didn't even want to have a physical space, right?
Sure.
Am I right on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we just, as human beings, we create these spaces mm-hmm. that provide that for us.
Sure.
It's a form of escapism. It's a soap opera. That's just what it is for us. So right. That just stood out to me.
Yeah. You know, another thing that stood out to me was his discussion in the book and in the interview about masculine Christianity. And you mentioned it just a moment ago about how sports has related to the male species mm-hmm. and how it has intensified, especially over the last few decades. But it's kind of always been that case. I told Dr. Balmer off microphone that I can remember as a kid sitting down on a Saturday morning and watch NFL films, and they talked about the gladiators of the Midway and rough and tumble roar. It was all really kind of militaristic type of language, and that's kind of played into this hyper masculinity that we have seen in our society today, and so. I just thought it was interesting. It's great. It's a great analysis. I just think we need to keep that in check at times because life is not a football game or a baseball game or a hockey game.
It's not. I think we need to remember it is escapism, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. And we need to just remember that. Mm-hmm. But also do the real work that needs to be done in the world. I found that the very end of the introduction, he says, a careful examination of the history of religion and the emergence of team sports in North America reveals all sorts of interconnections, beginning with the mythology surrounding the origins of baseball. And he talks about actually the mythology sort of surrounding the origins of the four sports that he talks about. And I couldn't help but remember the conversations we've had in the past few weeks about the need and the desire that we have to create our own origin story.
Yeah.
And how it just pervades into everything. Even in sports, we want to romanticize and we want to create this, this is how baseball was founded, or this is how football was founded. And the reality is much murkier than that. Sure. Even when he talks about football. And I mean, it was really difficult to listen to at times when he talked about the reality of some of the things that happened, especially during, the early days of integrating football. And, you had players who literally died because they were targeted. And just then reinforce the need for us to look honestly at our past, and how, like, while these things are fun and enjoyable, we also need to recognize that it's not tied up in a neat little bow.
No, it's not. In fact, we talk a little bit about this in the interview, that oftentimes sports will mirror society and society will mirror sports. And of course, we talk about the integration of baseball, Jackie Robinson, Dr. Balmer talks about football, also what happened with the First Nations people up in Canada, and how stickball turned into lacrosse turns into hockey. But it reminded me of something that just came to my mind, and I've shared this story with you.
I saw the light bulb.
It was bing. My great-grandfather, who I never met, who I'm named after, Mitchell Boutenot, played for an all-Indian baseball team and was pretty darn good at it. And I always loved the game, grew up playing the game, was fortunate enough to be able to play college baseball. But after my high school career, and as you said, I was pretty good at it. I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but
audience, he was very good. Was.
Exactly, was. But I remember being told by a recruiter one time that their college will not let him bring in Native American baseball players because Native Americans never stay. They always return home.
Well, the implication was that they were lazy, wasn't it?
They were lazy, and they would drop out of school. And I thought, are you kidding me? But that was the assessment. And now that I think about that, I think about all these players who take stances against racism, against inequality. And I applaud them because they know what it feels like. And shame on anybody who tells them to shut up and dribble.
Right.
Or to, get in line or just play the game. How dare you say that? They have felt the sting of oppression and marginalization all their lives. So let them speak out. But it was a great interview. We would really want to encourage you to buy the book. It's in bookstores now, Passion Play. But before we go,
what? Okay, so I had one more thing. And, okay. I mean, you took a really important, I think, turn with the conversation, which is super applicable. But you said sports mirrors society in many ways. And I, in preparing for our talk today, just started doing some Googling and was reminded of something I wish I had thought to ask Dr. Balmer about, even though I feel like it's somewhat rhetorical. I have an answer to this question, which I'm going to choose to believe would have been Dr. Balmer's answer.
Because you're so professorial.
So professorial. My apologies to Dr. Balmer. Right now he's thinking, what was I thinking?
Exactly.
Agreeing to this interview. Okay, so I grew up with an older brother who was such a sports fan. I grew up, indoctrinated into Dallas Cowboys culture. Like that was my family. So I'm familiar with all of this. I can recall, after Googling, the controversy that was Deflategate.
Yes.
I don't remember the year, but I remember it was a Super Bowl and Tom Brady, and there was some sort of hullabaloo over deflated balls.
Yes, they were quite deflated, just slightly.
In any case, so I went down a rabbit hole and started reading about the science of the PSI and the football. And it reminded me of the science that goes into sports.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And also, even knowing from our experience with our son who played competitive soccer all the way through high school, and knowing what, even just from his perspective, like when a new material of cleats came out or a ball or whatever it was, like you rush to get this because there had been studies and they had looked at this fabric of the Under Armour or whatever it was. Under Armour did not sponsor us.
But if they're interested.
Anyways, the amount, and from my brother again, and from sports radio, like Dr. Balmer talks about, just the minutia and the depth with which you can go into, for example, is it a metal bat versus a wooden bat, and how hitting it at a certain point causes a foul ball versus a home run. Yeah. All of these things, the science that goes into sports is ridiculous.
The science and the mathematics, because I'm sure your brother was just like me, knew the batting averages and knew the winning percentages and how many yards somebody had run, knew all those stats.
Exactly.
We couldn't tell you the algebra formulas, but we could tell you those statistics.
But you acknowledge the science behind all of the sports stuff, the equipment, the helmets, what we've done in helmets to help protect against concussions. So let me ask you this.
Okay.
Why, as a society, if we can accept all of this science as it relates to sports, can we not accept the same scientists who say, you know what, there is climate change and this minute degree of increase in our temperature is going to doom us?
I'm hoping that there was a cricket drop right there because there's not a good answer to that question or a mic drop.
So my answer was going to be, which I'm confident Dr. Balmer's is going to be, who the hell knows? Why is it that our population in general can accept that the NFL needs to invest millions of dollars into investigating Deflategate because of 1 or 2 pounds
or X-ray bats and all the crazy
exactly
things.
Because that's science.
Sure.
And yet we refuse to take the steps necessary to combat and take care of this other thing that we're dealing with that could very literally and is literally costing lives.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Missy. Our audience is sitting in their car. They've got to go to work or they've got to go into church. I don't know where they are, but they're waiting with bated breath.
We promised
your
them
story.
A really juicy story. We're just not.
So tell them your rubber story as you defined it.
Okay, so we lived in Texas, of course, because yay, Texas. And our kids were in elementary school, and our elementary school there in our neighborhood had a huge fall carnival every year. It was very successful. And our neighbors, who the husband was from...
He was English and she was Irish.
She was Irish. Lovely couple, adored them. They were working one of the booths. The kids would play a game and then get a prize, right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so Mitch happened to walk by, and Chris, our neighbor, last name redacted for privacy purposes, he was overheard telling the kids, you know, when there was like a treasure chest with prizes, right? Yeah. It's like stickers and bubble gum, whatever. Yeah. And so he says, if you dig down, can you say an English accent? I can't.
If you dig down deep enough, no, I don't know. That doesn't sound like English.
No, it doesn't.
No, I'll just say it in English. If you dig down deep enough, you'll find a rubber.
You'll find rubbers at the bottom.
And you could see the horror of these white suburban parents. He alliterated that.
He told the kids they could find rubbers at the bottom of the treasure box.
A teacher or a principal quickly told our English friend that in America they are called erasers.
Erasers. So there you go. There you have it, friends. If you hang on with us long enough, that's the story. Our great rubber story. Did not see that one coming into this podcast episode, but somehow it did.
Somehow it did. So, all right, everybody have a good weekend, and we'll be back next week. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.